この日本こそ誰にも仕留められなかったモビー・ディックだ。この巨大なクジラに森を突き立て。
While Team Ninja have mixed fantasy and history together in the past with previous games, Rise of the Ronin is an uber-serious action RPG that has thrown away magic and dragons in favor of sword fighting and a somewhat historically accurate event. The game takes place in Japan's Bakumatsu period, 300 years into the tyrannical rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. It leaps across a number of years during this period and often focuses on major historical events at the time. There are even direct characters from the period in the game who play major roles in the story. Matthew C. Perry, for example, was an American naval officer who sticks out like a sore thumb during the majority of the game thanks to his overly American appearance and accent. While I do miss the fantasy elements in Rise of the Ronin, mainly because I was fascinated how Team Ninja merged history and folklore together in past games, I do have to commend the studio for their work in Rise of the Ronin. The game's brutal storyline captures the real darkness of the Bakumatsu period and the slow downfall of the Tokugawa shogunate. Of course, Rise of the Ronin takes an entire game to tell you this story, which means you have to be dedicated to the cause. Various characters come and go, and while some story arcs are compelling enough to pay attention to, others aren't as lucky. As a result, Rise of the Ronin comes out as a mixed bag, and its overly serious tone often gets lost in between the shallow and dull world. Up to now, we have experienced mission-based gameplay from Team Ninja. This is the studio's first open-world game, and while there are some gems to experience here and there, the world leaves a lot to be desired. Large open areas with little to do overstay their welcome. Rinse and repeat sandbox objectives get tiresome, and visually speaking, the world lacks creativity. Don't get me wrong, there are some incredible standout locations in Rise of the Ronin. The Edo map truly captures the ancient times with its dense architecture and sprawling streets. However, the majority of the game slowly blends together after a while, providing almost no sense of discovery. Team Ninja kind of knew this too, and even threw in an auto-run feature where you could stamp down a mark on the map and your character would automatically sprint his way to the spot. I spend most of my time placing down a marker, automatically running there either on foot or by horse, getting off, clearing the map, saving a cat or lighting a bonfire, and moving on to the next. While I had this instant love for the world at first, the more I played through the game, the more I realized how generic the world was. The sandbox objectives also grow tiresome. Public orders are invaded towns and camps which have to be cleared. Cleared here means killing all the bandits and enemies so that normal people can move in and make it functional. These takeovers involve defeating a bunch of weaker enemies and a handful of more powerful ones called formidable foes. Once done, people would settle in and a shop might open. This shop, however, didn't offer anything remotely different from the others one district over. Each district does have a checklist of things to complete, which will make all those completionists happy. I spent less time discovering and more time going through the set objectives thanks to this list. There's only a handful of things to do in each area, so it is not oversaturated with missions. Cats can be hugged and counted towards a total, photograph opportunities let me snap up historical locations, and I could also pray at shrines for some skill points. The issue here is that everything contributes to the game's progression system in one way or another, so as boring as these side objectives get, I felt compelled to complete them. The cats, for example, rank up a bond between my character and another, essentially unlocking items to purchase such as skill books and gear. The same goes for the photographs and wanted assassinations called fugitives. You then take these objectives, add them to the long ongoing story, sprinkle on a not so majestic map, and you have a game that kind of becomes a chore to play. Some nights I felt as I wasn't making any progress with anything. I spent hours busy doing stuff with no real reward for doing it. I was tired and pretty much over it. The hours became days and the days became weeks of tedious objectives in a shallow world. That energy is then fed into the main story, which you need to pay attention to. I began to drift away during the dialogue, picking up my phone during cutscenes and even skipping some text. The whole experience became too much of the same thing after a while.
I took them with me to the States, and they're back here in Japan now. But that's all. Well...
Sure, there are some standout moments in the game. The bond system let me focus on a specific character relationship with another person. I would then do a specific number of quests for them and be forced to make a dialogue decision to help increase that friendship level. As a result, this bond would increase and I would unlock more gear and rewards. However, again, there are so many characters in the game, it all feels a bit watered down. It became impossible for me to care the same for all of them, especially given how the game doesn't push this agenda as much as, say, Dragon Age or Mass Effect. These people are also only with you during certain parts of the story, and the rest of the time, it just forgets about them. Not to mention that the time spent doing everything else in order to unlock the next step of the Bond mission pads this with even more of the same content. Again, this is great for those who love completing a checklist of objectives, but if you came here for the sense of Japan, the fun might vanish.
What would you like me to work?
Rise of the Ronin does have an excellent combat system though, which helps carry everything else that needs help in the game. It follows in the footsteps of Neo and Wolong, meaning it is refined, layered in various systems, and incredibly fun to participate in. There's a lot of freedom to shape your character into any fighter you choose, including using one of the various weapon types and doubling that up with a secondary weapon and items. I'm a katana sim, so I'm mainly stuck with that weapon type. I also feel like Team Ninja has always favored the katana compared to other weapons in previous games. This can also be said for Rise of the Ronin. The weapon, for example, includes 9 different combat styles compared to the 4 or 5 across other weapons. So there's a lot of fun to be had in this tree. However, other weapons provide some cool combat encounters too. The Adachi is a large sword that can be swung overhead. There are also jewel blades, spears, and other weapon types to enjoy. Swapping between combat styles also switches up your attack pattern. Enemies are also equipped with their own weapons and unique styles too. Some counter certain styles, which means you either take or deal more stun damage depending on what end you're on. Given that all weapons have at least 3 combat styles, you'll always have one style equipped to counter another by quickly holding down the R1 button and flicking the analog stick in the direction to choose the icon that shows the advantage symbol. Combat flow is generally the same as Neo. You carefully attack enemies and parry them with perfect timing to deplete their key bar. This bar essentially acts as the stamina. Once depleted, they will stun, and I could press the triangle button to deal a heavy attack called a critical hit attack. Most fodder enemies usually die before the key bar depletes. However, formidable foes often put up more of a fight. These encounters rely on carefully watching their attacks and dodging and timing to stun them. Some enemies could also parry my attacks, which resulted in my keybar depleting, leaving me open for a heavy attack. So the player doesn't have an advantage here. Boss fights then put this all to the test with beefier foes that deal much more damage. These fights can last well into the 10-minute range, as I dodged and parried as much as possible. Similar to previous games, Rise of the Ronin relies on learning attack patterns, and the boss fights put this to the test above everything else. The more I died, the better I got at learning their movements and timing my parries. It is enjoyable, I don't deny that for a second. Combat never grew old at all. Even when I was mindlessly slaughtering bandits, it still felt rewarding and looked pretty stylish. Assassinations are equally as fun, especially when I timed a strike from my glider in the sky. It is the Tenchu experience I wanted, and it delivered. It is far from perfect, however. Rise of the Ronin tries to push its own agenda in certain mechanics, and they simply don't work. Sneaking and assassinating, for example, is cool for the first few enemies, but it takes too long if you're sticking to the silent route. I assassinated where I could, but most of the time I would prefer to jump into the combat head first. The game even provides the sound machine that senses enemies nearby for you to sneak up on. I used it once. You can also throw bombs to cause a noise and distract them. I used that once too. It also doesn't help that the enemy AI is pathetic. You can creep up on them by simply walking, and often they would just walk right past me without even noticing me. So even if you went the silent route, the game doesn't even try to make it difficult for you because these enemies are dumb as rocks. Then there's the co-op, which is okay. I must add that playing a co-op mission on the much higher difficulties provided a much more enjoyable time due to how strategic we had to be when tackling enemies. We still didn't assassinate them, but the boss fights threw us against the brute with a tank load of health. It would take us a good 10 minutes to take him down, and we would walk away with no health pills or items left. These fights are truly the pinnacle of the co-op experience because of how excellent they feel. It is simply 10 minutes of intense combat which already feels so great. I do have to add that I am a little bit disappointed by the amount of co-op available in Rise of the Ronin. You can only do main missions, which are sadly far and few between. It takes forever to reach these main missions too, because again, the game's boring padding forces you to complete mindless activities for hours on end. So yes, it does have co-op, but don't expect to spend much time in it. I also need to chat about the game's visuals because they are a bit of a sore topic. Rise of the Ronin doesn't look like a modern day game. The world itself shows a sort of rushed development timeline with various graphical issues which are hard to ignore. Tile textures on the most basic objects like a tree are an absolute eyesore. Full buildings pop up while you're running towards them. Trees all suffer from low resolution renders even when you are just a few meters away from them. Not to mention that almost every moving object has FSR noise on it because there's some sort of upscaling taking place here. Even the graphics mode runs at a lower resolution. What confuzzled me about this is that from a technical standpoint, there's absolutely no reason why Rise of the Ronin should look like this. There are no fancy technical engine features at work here which might warrant the shoddy visuals. I can understand if the world was highly detailed and had fancy physics engines blowing petals and leaves around, but apart from the odd rainstorm here and there and a basic day and night cycle, the world is static. Rise of the Ronin takes place in a generic world with a bunch of trees and hills, yet it has Tears of the Kingdom trees. It doesn't add up. Towns are made up of copy and paste buildings and NPCs too, so why are all the compromises to the overall image quality? I hope this gets fixed because, to be blunt, Rise of the Ronin looks worse than some last gen games and isn't up to scratch. I don't know if Team Ninja perhaps don't have the expertise in open world design and the engine maybe can't handle this ambitious render pipeline. I can't explain exactly why things look like this, but I just expected a bit more from a PlayStation published game. With that being said, Rise of the Ronin isn't a bad game. I think that if you remove the boring open world and horrible checklist features from the experience, you have a rich and deep action game with some fantastic narrative. Sadly, all the good moments are hidden away under layers and layers of mindless gameplay, and they all get lost along the way. You really have to be dedicated to the game's Japanese historical story and the combat to get through this. For me, it had its moments, but after 30 hours, it struggled to keep my interest. So those are my thoughts on Rise of the Ronin. Are you looking to pick this game up? Let me know in the comments down below. While you're here, please do consider liking and subscribing for more future content, and visit glitch.online for more gaming, tech news and reviews. Until next time, farewell.